Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills. My name is Rhombus Tix, and I'm reading some of my earliest stories and then commenting on how awful they are. This one is the next in a series I'm calling Swamp Castle, but the name of the story is Savior Unto the Lost Generation by Rhombus Tix. So let me get this straight. You want me to raise your child to be a superhero? That was the most important question to the conversation. That was the part that stuck with me right away. It began, Rosa Inala, so, are you a licensed child creche specialist? Yes, I replied. Are you currently accepting additional contracts? Yes, this was really annoying. My phone screen message clearly said who I was and what I did. These people were idiots. We have an infant that we would like to be raised with extremely specific parameters. They are, we theorize, well beyond the norm for your profession. Utmost discretion would be required. I'm not doing anything illegal, if that's what you're asking. No. We have a program that is designed for a specific profession, and that is. It is a variant of law enforcement. However, we do not desire the unit placed in your care to enter conventional law enforcement channels. He shall maintain a secret identity and do good works as any other citizen might, while maintaining productive employment within society. That's when I was asked the superhero question. I didn't expect a serious answer. That is essentially correct, although you are somewhat lacking in the details. Unit 2471 has received cybernetic enhancements that allow him to adjust properly to the culture of your species. He will merely adjust in a biological similar fashion to childhood. The voice on the other end of the phone was pleasant enough, sure, but it had to be insane. And your reasons for wanting to do this are what exactly? Our analysis of your culture shows that the most benevolent alien contact possible would be by raising a member of your species as a surrogate offspring of your own. We estimate that he will be accepted as a part of your cultural mythos. Let me get back to you on that. Please hurry. We have over 750 other candidates to screen. Right. I hung up the phone. Aliens. Right. People don't raise children anymore. They paid people like me to do it. Society moved far too fast for traditional parenting. Understanding biometrics had moved most things to a point where people understood the physiological need to be parents. They simply found ways to work around it. Nowadays, as long as people had a feeling that somewhere out there a child they had contributed to what was running around, they didn't really feel the need to get involved in that gritty, earthy level. That they left to the help like me. That was an oversimplification, of course. People did honestly consider themselves parents. Like, if you walked up to the average person on the street and asked them, would you consider giving up your child for adoption? They would look shocked and insulted. On the other hand, if you ask them, how much time do you spend on average with their child? They would say 4 to 5 hours a week. The call didn't surprise me at first. I thought it was just another of the local shock jocks trying to play a prank on some RTVP. They were always trying crazier and crazier ideas to get ratings. You just learn to tune them out after a while. The best part of my job was making stuff up. Most people functioned in 2 different worlds, the real one that they interacted with like everyone else, and the one they liked for themselves. Implants and AI had grown to the point that anyone could experience whatever they wanted so long as they respected the other guy's zone of control. Parents like to have a lot of input into the lives of their children, so they created virtual echoes of themselves that occasionally popped in to make sure that they were, quote, behaving, end quote. Most took the standard package right off the shelf, slapped the minimum mandated by law into it, and set it loose in their child's creche. On the other hand, a few parents, generally mothers, were so concerned about their children that they spent hours making sure that the construct had just the right touches. The spooky part was that they took most of their time working with the construct to teach their children than they actually spent in direct contact with them. Now, don't get me wrong. The wet works don't thrill me either. I mean, that was the fundamental part of what I did. No machine was ever perfect when dealing with something as squirmy as a human being. And the machines broke down. When the machines broke down, someone had to go in there and make sure that they were burped, fed, cleaned, changed, and comforted. Robots and AI were amazing things, but they simply couldn't care about human children the way humans could. I wish I had done more. But while I was able to see the problem, I couldn't do anything about it. How do you uninvent technology? If you have a magic machine that will make all the messiness and time-consuming process out of parenting, how do you convince someone to do something like that for the sheer joy of doing it? Most of them would rather have a few minutes with them smiling and laughing or drawing creatively, or review those candid moments at the park without actually having to be there. So enter the aliens. I suppose it was logical that aliens might examine the popular culture figures of our cultural myths. I mean, look at the number of times in the movies that aliens try to make peaceful contact with us and we just obliterate them. On the other hand, look at the number of movies where the aliens are just plain evil and humanity stomps them. If you looked through our culture and found the alien that we regarded as part of us, you couldn't help but come up on Superman. It makes sense, really. Star blazes from the heavens, it lands in Kansas. Kindly parents take him in as one of their own. Kid grows up. And then the kid fights for truth, justice, and the American way. In the end, I took the job. They were offering 5 times the normal fee. I didn't care if this was some trick or not. If I didn't sign up for anything, they'd never get the right. If I didn't sign anything, they'd never get the rights, and I would still have the cash and contract for the job. I considered it my own private joke. I was wrong. Seeing is believing, and I believed. I started to pick up little clues at first. The infant that they left me with was a picture-perfect spitting image of the infant on the Gerber baby food packages. When the light hit his face just the right way, it even looked like it was more drawing than real flesh. Yet that was only a trick of the light. Every single medical checkup we gave him showed him to be 100% grade A American kid. The suite that they left him with was weird, too. The walls of his creche were made to seem silver, like they were out of tinfoil or something. No cute little animals or fuzzy butterflies or rainbows. It was all just silver tinfoil and disembodied male voice instructing him on everything from science to philosophy. They programmed the stuff like they expected it to stick somehow. I think the thing that finally convinced me that they were giant monsters. Were the giant monsters. Things were relatively quiet for the first 10 months or so. He grew at a fairly accelerated rate, but he was still quite clearly only a child of 2 or 3 years old physically. I guess that it would have defeated the whole purpose of what they were doing if it made it look too fast or too unnatural. And then, just like clockwork, every Friday at noon, for 5 weeks straight, some new creature would show up and begin destroying the city. The most recent version, a bug, had giant metal plates on the side of its head that it used to launch twin lightning bolts down on the surrounding emergency vehicles. It had already smashed 4 department stores and half of a commuter rail station before he showed up. Bashing his fists into the air in confidence and rage, Gerber smashed the monster into a dozen pieces in the blink of an eye. His speed was so blindingly fast that you could only catch his wake. It almost hurt to watch. In a few short moments, the monster had become pulp, and the mysterious infant that had fought it ran off into the shadows. I think the aliens might have misjudged the public reaction. To begin with, people generally thought this whole thing was a new reality program gone horribly wrong, like I did at first. The genetic monsters were just beyond what most technology could produce. At least, that's what I would have thought. Then all the news channels began dragging out expert after expert who explained precisely what would be needed to create such a freakish thing of nature. They didn't quite have as good an explanation for Gerber, but most of them dismissed him as some kind of holographic projection, while the real people who created the monsters simply activated some kind of biological internal self-destruct device. The most ironic part of the whole thing was that instead of shock and awe by the viewing public, Gerber became a cult icon. He was a hero to the children. Despite it all, they saw through the image and hype in commercials and took Gerber for what he actually was. The irony of that statement being that he hadn't intended to be heroic at all, but merely an extremely elaborate "hello, we're here" from an alien species that didn't understand humanity. Which, of course, is exactly why they liked him. He didn't try for it. He wasn't a conglomeration of market forces that had determined that the youth demographic would be more likely to buy Zinco toys, toilet paper dolls, if they had some genetically altered freak fight other genetically altered freaks. I didn't understand this. The aliens were obviously the ones making monsters, so why wasn't this just seen as some gimmick, just like everything else? I mean, I suppose one could argue that it was more than that. It might have started out with monsters, but it grew into something more. Gerber thought fighting bad guys was what society needed and wanted. Yes, the monsters were fake, but the criminals he locked up weren't. Neither were all of the corrupt politicians, corporate execs, and white-collar criminals he confronted. He never acted as judge. He just flew in, used his powers to expose what they were doing to the public in a light of day that even they couldn't hide, and then flew back into obscurity. The aliens were good at faking stuff, but their virus couldn't fool real people who began to look for real anomalies in the system. Tick off enough people, and they will devote more and more resources trying to find you, and eventually they did. The problem was that the aliens had failed to take into account that comic books really didn't handle how well secret identities would work. Then again, the real world did not handle how a comic book hero, or at least an alien trying to emulate a comic book hero, would act either. You can imagine the predictable results. They broke Gerber's, i.e. my, door front down and threatened to haul him off to jail. He refused to go. So they tried to arrest him. That didn't work very well. They couldn't seem to physically move him at all. He just laughed good-naturedly and shrugged them off. He walked out the door and kept doing what he had always done. It was like that for months. He'd do a good deed, they'd try and arrest him. He'd ignore them and go on and save the next victim of oppression or doom. His popularity among the children only grew. They started to believe in something again. The media conglomerates tried to capitalize on it by selling Gerber's image on everything. But the curious thing was that the descendants of the real man the aliens based the image on filed suit and won massive amounts of damage for violation of copyright infringement against the corporations. Public opinion started to sway against him, despite his good deeds. The older generations simply listened to what they were told by the news reports about the dangerous menace to society. That was when the aliens listened to Gerber's request for a better solution. We had been weighed, measured, judged, and found wanting. The aliens decided to take another lesson from humanity's archives. Suddenly Gerber and all the children on Earth were gone. The world became quiet. A world without children was a world without dreams. There was a brief period of madness, but eventually the world limped along as it always had. They still grew food for a while, but even that stopped when most of the farmers grew too old to command the bots. I thought I was done for as well. Heaven knows that there isn't much of a use for someone who takes care of children in a world without them. And then the ship came down in the dead of night, and suddenly I wasn't quite so old anymore, and many young and vibrant faces, untainted by the evils of the world they came from, and asked to hear a story from one who would the one who had taken them away. And so I told them, and their children, and their children's children. And they all lived happily ever after. That doesn't mean I still don't have a hankering for a badly cooked hamburger or a deep-fried burrito now and then. So sue me. So I think that story is a lot better than the last one. It has a clear beginning, middle, and end. It has at least two interesting characters. A protagonist. The antagonist is more the world writ large. If I was to rewrite this story now, I would create the equivalent of a Lex Luthor for Gerber. Somebody that was as corrupt and cynical as the forces that he was oppressing. There's also clearly a loophole that I didn't think about there, which is, did Gerber sterilize all of the people, i.e. they would keep having children? So unless the aliens made it a regular point of stealing every child that was born on Earth, which they clearly have the technology to do, there's a bit of a problem there. And given the horrific nature of this setting I set up, where most parents basically dump off their children into an AI box and with robots and holograms to raise them that they occasionally look in on, you could have covered that loophole by having Gerber or the aliens shut off or disable that technology. But I do find it interesting that I was intelligent enough when I wrote this 16 years ago to understand that children do see things that adults do not. There's a reason why young people don't use Facebook, for example. It's garbage, and they know it. This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com. contains all our podcasts. Copyright 2022.
To fight the forces of evil!